So let's start some solving now. Our first section is going to be about solving quadratic equations by factoring. And these quick steps over here are obviously factoring is going to be important if we're going to be solving it that way. You want to factor completely, and we've already talked about how to factor completely, and there is a video that you can find on the YouTube channel that will help you with that practice if you need some more of that. Once you have it factored completely, then you'll be using the zero product property to set each factor equal to 0 to find the solutions, because this is your zero product property down here, where if A times B is equal to 0, then the only way to get that product to equal 0 is if one of the factors is equal to 0, or perhaps both, right? So either A or B or both needs to be 0 in order to have a product equal to 0. That's the only way that's possible. That's really helpful for us as we're trying to solve. So first thing you notice is that all three of these are equal to 0. So now we're going to get into some factoring. So for our first example, what you will notice is that we have a single x squared, so 1x squared, which means we can factor this by doing a diamond problem. So as we set that diamond problem up, the negative 21, which is what we multiply to, goes on the top, and the 4 goes on the bottom. We multiply the top, add to the bottom, which means that those two numbers are going to be a negative 7 and a positive 3 for us as we try to figure out what multiplies a negative 21 and adds up to 4. So we can factor to x minus 7 and an x plus 3, and as you set up that factors, it's still going to be equal to 0. Now we use our zero product property, which tells us that x minus 7 is going to equal 0, and also x plus 3 is going to equal 0. So you just solve each of these. This is pretty simple. You get x equals 7, x equals negative 3, and that is our final answer for the first one. Now for the second one, you notice that you have a 2x squared, so that means you need to do a box and a diamond problem. So let's go through that process quickly. So the first thing we need to do is set up our box, our generic rectangle, and the 2x squared goes on the bottom left, the negative 15 goes in the top right, and now we need to figure out what goes on these others by doing the diamond problem, and we multiply the 2x squared and the negative 15 to get negative 30. Remember, we multiply these two, and then you put the negative 7, which was here, in the bottom of that diamond problem. So we think about what are the two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add up to negative 7. That'd be a negative 10 and a positive 3. So that means we put a negative 10x here and a positive 3x there. And as we complete our factoring, we can pull a x out of this and a 2x here to get 2x squared, which means this has to be a 3 and this has to be a negative 5. And you notice how all that works. So that means that our factors are a 2x plus 3 and an x minus 5 is equal to 0. You set each of those equal to 0, so 2x plus 3 equals 0 and x minus 5 equals 0 would be our two equations. So as you solve this equation here on the left, you subtract 3 and divide by 2. So that's how you get a negative 3 halves, or a negative 1.5, and you get an x equals 5 for setting this one equal to 0. In our final example, you'll notice that you have a 12x squared out front, but you notice that a 4 can go into all those terms, which means we need to factor out that greatest common factor first. So as we do that, you factor out a 4, and then you're going to have a 3x squared minus 5x minus 2 is equal to 0. So now what we need to do is set the 3x squared minus 5x minus 2 equal to 0, which means we need to set up a generic rectangle because it's a 3x squared. So a 3x squared is going to go in the bottom left from here. The negative 2 will go in the top right. Now you need to do the diamond problem, where you have the product of 3x squared and negative 2 go up top to make a negative 6x squared. Your negative 5 is going to go in the bottom of that diamond problem. That means that the two things that multiply to negative 6 and add to negative 5 are a negative 6x and then a positive 1x. Those are the values that go into the missing spots of the generic rectangle, and you factor out. You can only pull out an x from the horizontal, which means you have to have a 3x in the bottom, which makes this just a 1 down here and a negative 2 up there. And so our factors then are a 4 still out front, and you have a 3x plus 1 and an x minus 2. And that's all still equal to 0. So now, as we set this up, you set each part equal to 0. 4 is never going to equal 0, so you don't have to worry about that part. If there was an x, then you would, if for whatever reason you had factored out an x, but there's not in this scenario. So you just set your stuff with the x, which would be 3x plus 1 equal to 0, and x minus 2 equal to 0 by the zero product property. I forgot to circle those top solutions. So now as we do these bottom solutions, you set each part equal to 0, you get x equals 2, subtract 1 and divide by 3 to get x equals negative 1/3. So factoring completely helps you come up with the nice zero.